I'm going to introduce Anders Fogh Rasmussen one more time to introduce our next guest. Our panel will be moderated by Jamil.
Please. Yeah.
What do Lithuanian beer, Australian wine, and Taiwanese pineapple have in common? You will not find any of them in a Beijing supermarket. They are among thousands of products that China has banned in recent years. Banned in retaliation for decisions by democracies that China did not like. It is a tactic we call economic coercion, used by China to prevent democracies from criticizing their human rights record or pushing them to limit contacts with Taiwan. We must stand up against this economic bullying. The democratic world still accounts for over 60% of global GDP. If we stand together, that's a language Beijing understands. That is why my foundation developed a proposal for an economic Article 5, one modeled on NATO's Article 5. And it is an ambition I share with our next speaker. As Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister, Liz Truss called for the democratic world to draw closer together, to be united in the face of autocratic regimes. She called for a network of liberty to advance the frontiers of freedom. I fully agree. She has been a strong and consistent critic of China's authoritarianism. She recognizes the importance of tackling economic coercion, calling for the creation of an economic NATO. Actually, she will fly to Taiwan immediately after this summit. From a summit for democracy to a beacon of democracy. It is a pleasure to welcome back our host, Jamil Anderlini, and the former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom, Liz Truss. Please join me in welcoming them on stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very good to see you.
Thank you, Anders, and wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us. As we just heard, you are heading straight from here to Taiwan. A senior colleague of yours from your own party described your trip to Taiwan as Instagram diplomacy. So what is it that you are hoping to achieve with this visit?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that we engage with Taiwan. And we need to remember what Beijing is trying to do. They are trying to reduce the space that Taiwan has to operate. They're trying to reinterpret the one China policy as the idea that nobody in any Western democracy should have any engagement at all with Taiwan. I believe that is the wrong thing for us to do. Because what I believe is that makes it more likely that China will succeed in its ambitions of taking over Taiwan and extinguishing freedom and democracy there. The reason I'm going to Taiwan is I have been invited by the Taiwan government. And I believe it is they who know best. They, the democratically elected government of Taiwan, know best what is best for their citizens and their future. So I'm very much led by them and encouraged that they believe my visit will help their cause in promoting freedom and democracy. And as the former NATO Secretary General said, Taiwan is a beacon of democracy, and it is the vital front line now of the struggle between authoritarianism and democracy. And if you look 30 years ago, more people in the world were living under democracies than they are now. Frankly, we're on the back foot, and I believe we need to do all we can to fight back.
So when Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan late last year, you saw the reaction. China extended its blockade and the normal exercises it does to an unprecedented scale. Are you expecting warships and airplanes? And will you be offended if you get a lesser reception than Nancy Pelosi?
The way I look at it is what China's strategy is to try and make it unacceptable for people to visit Taiwan, for people to talk about Taiwan, for countries to enter trade agreements with Taiwan, for Taiwan to have proper representation in world bodies. And rather than playing the man, we should play the ball. And we should be talking about how we want to develop our relationship with Taiwan. I'm a great supporter, for example, of Taiwan joining the CPTPP. I believe they should be represented at the World Health Organization. I think they have a lot to offer. And I don't believe in responding to the rhetorical threats and bullying that we hear from Beijing. Instead, what we need to be doing is taking the practical steps to make sure Taiwan's able to defend itself and to make sure that Taiwan has the economic engagement with the rest of the world. We also, by the way, have to ensure that we are not overexposed to China. And I think we've seen all of this play out in the very tragic conflict that is now taking place in Ukraine. If we had acted earlier, if we'd fast-tracked Ukraine's membership of NATO, if we had put sanctions on when Putin took action in Crimea or in the Donbass, then I believe the conflict would have been less likely to happen. And we really need to learn the lesson that we cannot listen to rhetorical bullying from authoritarian regimes to stop us doing things. Instead, we need to take practical action to make those eventualities much less likely.
So you raised Ukraine, and President Zelensky is in London just today. Do you think the British government is doing enough to support Ukraine now, let alone 2014, now, and especially in the context of this current or upcoming counteroffensive?
Look, I'm very proud that the UK was the first European country to send weapons to Ukraine. We led on sanctions with our counterparts around the world. We're now leading on long-range weapons. I think, frankly, the entire free world needs to do as much as it can. I want to see fighter jets supplied. I want to see more tanks being offered to Ukraine, because every day longer this conflict goes on, more people are suffering. Ukraine is defending not just themselves and freedom and democracy in Ukraine, they're defending all of us across the European continent. So I would urge the UK government to do as much as we can together with our allies.
Your successor, he really hasn't been quite as vocal or as tough as you were, or Boris Johnson was, wouldn't you say?
No, I think we are, we're sending extra long-range weapons. That is very welcome. I've said I want to see us sending fighter jets to Ukraine. I know we're supplying training on that. And I want to see the whole Western alliance doing that. But we've got to focus on Ukraine. We also need to focus on the threat from China. That is my message, that these things are inherently linked. If we take our eye off the ball on China, we'll be facing a very, very serious problem down the road.
And as Prime Minister, you had planned to redesignate China as a threat You just used the word threat. But your successor scrapped that plan. So why do you think he did that?
Well, I do think, and I stand by my assertion that we should designate China as a threat. I think they are a very clear threat. I think they're the largest threat that we face to the free world. And why I'm here today at this summit is because I believe that we all need to wake up to the threat China presents, that we need to make sure that Taiwan is able to defend itself, and we're not facing a very serious situation down the track.
So why do you think so many in the British UK political class, that's how I wrote the question, seem so keen to keep sweet with China? Is it just good old-fashioned British mercantilism?
Well, I don't think this is just a British problem, frankly.
True,
I think
but
the entire...
Germany, for example, is much more economically reliant. Britain is not very economically reliant. So why is it that...
Well, I think we're reliant on different things. So if you look at Germany, they're very reliant on exports to China, whereas the UK has benefited from a lot of investment from China. So I think it depends on the industry or the shape of the economy. But there's no doubt that the entire Western world, including the United States, including Europe, including the UK, has become too dependent on China. And that's a problem because it's given China leverage over us. And it's also a problem economically. And we have seen the action that China has taken, violating rules, state subsidies on industry, intellectual property breaches. They've undermined our trade system as well as undermining freedom and democracy in the Pacific. So yes, the UK needs to take more action, but it's not just the UK. It's the whole continent of Europe. It's also the United States. And my main message, and this is my point about an economic NATO, is we need to take action collectively. We will be much more effective if we have a common approach towards China in terms of what technology we're willing to export to China, in terms of the level of dependency we want to have. I believe we should reduce that dependency. In terms of the action we take if there's economic coercion, we need to act collectively, and we need a proper mechanism to do that. So when the war in Ukraine started, we did put really tough sanctions on. We said we would do that at the G7. We coordinated it. But the G7 doesn't have a sort of permanent coordinating body. We've got arrangements with other countries like South Korea who also put sanctions on Russia. But what I would like to see is that type of structure formalized. So there is a committee that makes decisions about how we approach trade and investment with China, how we react if there's economic coercion, because I do not think at the moment it's organized enough. And I don't think Britain can act alone. I don't think Germany can act alone. I think it has to be a collective approach.
Are you really saying, as I think I heard you say, that the US has to be even tougher on the Communist Party of China, on China, than it already is? Because in Europe, where I live, in Brussels, the opposite is the feeling there, that the US is far too tough on China and they should just be a bit nicer to Beijing and the Communist Party. So you're really saying, this is my headline hopefully, are you really saying Liz Truss says America should be tougher on China?
I think the question is how we are tough. Because for me, this is not about rhetoric, and we talked earlier about some of the belligerent rhetoric that comes out of Beijing. It's actually, what do we do economically? Are we really shifting our supply chains to countries we can trust that don't undermine freedom and democracy? Are we really making sure that exports of technology aren't being misused by the Chinese state? Are we making sure that they are not able to steal intellectual property or interfere with our internal systems? And are we operating that correctly? So what I care about is what we do. I care about what we do on economics. I care about what we do. I care less about the rhetoric, because I think fundamentally we send mixed messages if we continue with the same level of trade and investment with China, but just put messages out that are different. We actually have to show we're serious. Because one of the issues, I mentioned this with respect to Ukraine, was I don't think Vladimir Putin believed that the West was serious about sanctions before we put them on. And we have to be absolutely clear that if there is some kind of escalation in Taiwan, there would be a very severe and serious reaction.
So I was one of the journalists who traveled with Emmanuel Macron to China, and on the plane back, he gave us an interview and said some things which were not certainly in Washington weren't taken very well. Why is it that Europe is so divided on how to deal with China? Because Emmanuel Macron's vision of how to deal with China is not your vision, with all respect.
No, it isn't, and I've been very publicly critical of what he said. Because fundamentally, the future of Taiwan is important to people in Europe, not just because we care about a free democracy, which it is, but because it would have huge knock-on effects on freedom and democracy, whether it's on the global trading system, which we know it's absolutely crucial to, but also to emboldening China in their attempts to undermine freedom and democracy. Because this isn't just a battle between a geopolitical battle between countries trying to amass power. It's a battle of ideas between authoritarian regimes and democracies. And that is why I think it is so important that we do take the threat to Taiwan seriously in Europe. And of course, any threat to Taiwan will also embolden Russia. I mean, there's no doubt, and they've been very clear about this, that Xi and Putin are working in partnership. Of course, Russia is the junior partner, but nevertheless, they are working in partnership.
When often today, when we are talking about China, we talk about China, not the Communist Party of China. And I wonder if you differentiate, and you would say that if the Communist Party of China was not running China, that you would have a different view, a different opinion, a different feeling about the country as a threat.
Well, I mean, if China was a free democracy, it would be a very different country. And I'm a huge admirer of Chinese civilization, the culture of China, but it is being run as a totalitarian state, controlling its people. And one of the reasons that they see Taiwan as such a threat is because it's 80 miles away, it's successfully running as a free democracy, and people in China can see that. So it's a direct repudiation of everything the Chinese Communist Party stand for. But of course, I would love to see China become a free democracy. And I think that's what we all hoped. And back to your point about why do some people in Europe still hang out a hope that somehow if we engage with China, then things will move in the right direction. Because that was the original strategy. We all believed in the 1990s, admitting China to the World Trade Organization, they would get richer, the country would get freer. That has not proven to be the case. And I think it is now time for Europe to wake up and see very, very clearly what is happening. But I don't doubt that some people still want to cling on to that belief that somehow things will get better because it's the easier thing to believe. It's a very tough thing to have to think we are going to deal with this authoritarian regime in a very serious way.
I have to ask because I do oversee our UK coverage, and my UK-based colleagues are pushing me to ask you.
Don't listen to them. I think we need to turn your earpiece off.
That's what the Chinese Communist Party would do, Ms. Truss.
I wouldn't do it in an authoritarian way.
No, you do it in a very democratic way. Yeah.
In a democratic way.
So, do you still speak with Boris Johnson and Kwasi Kwarteng?
Yes, I do, yes.
You do? Okay.
That's the difficult question. I can deal with that.
How often?
I don't
week?
record all my phone calls and all my meetings. I talk to my colleagues, of course I do. I talk to all my colleagues in the Conservative Party. And I speak to colleagues in the Labour Party as well, many of whom agree with me on China.
So do you hope that you'll be able to come back as Prime Minister?
No, I don't.
You don't want to be Prime Minister?
I have no ambitions to be Prime Minister again. What I care about is I care about making sure that freedom and democracy prevail across the world and advocating for an economic NATO, which I believe will help achieve that. I care about the British economy becoming successful and our country growing, but I have no ambitions to be Prime Minister again.
You are standing in the next for the next parliament.
I
And
am, yes.
Would you take a role if by some miracle the Tories win the next election? Would you?
This is like there's a lot of people here. This is the kind of bias we get.
Bias, not political. We're completely non-partisan,
yeah.
and I'm a New Zealander, so I have no skin in the game, and an American.
I'm not going to run there either.
No, well, you're welcome to. It's probably an improvement.
I don't like the use of the word probably, baby.
But would you serve in a cabinet? Would you serve on the front bench if you were asked under another Tory government?
I'm enjoying freedom at the moment. You know,
And
being
democracy.
able to achieve and do things I wasn't able to do when I was in government. I would have loved to visit Taiwan when I was in government. I wasn't able to because of our policy. I'm now able to do that. So I'm enjoying freedom. I'm not thinking too much about the distant future at the moment.
Next year, with the election. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's wonderful
Thank
to see you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
You too.